Matthew 10:34 to 39. In Matthew 10, Jesus sends his disciples to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. The chapter unfolds within a very specific historical setting. The Messiah had come to his covenant people, announcing that the long-awaited kingdom of heaven had drawn near. His messengers were commissioned to proclaim that reality throughout the towns of Israel. Yet the arrival of the kingdom would not be received peacefully by all. The words of Matthew 10:34 to 39 reveal the profound upheaval that the presence of the Messiah would bring within the covenant nation. Jesus begins with a startling declaration. Open quote, "Do not think that I came to bring peace on earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword." Close quote. This statement must be understood within the prophetic framework of Israel's history. The coming of the Messiah was often associated with peace, yet the prophets also spoke of a time of intense covenant crisis. The appearance of the king would expose the hearts of the people. His message would separate those who recognized the fulfillment of God's promises from those who resisted it. The sword spoken of here is not a call to physical violence, but a metaphor for division. The proclamation that the kingdom had arrived would cut through households, traditions, and loyalties. It would expose the difference between faith in the Messiah and allegiance to the fading structures of the old covenant order. Jesus then quotes from the prophet Micah, open quote, "For I have come to set a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and a man's enemies will be those of his own household." Close quote. This citation from Micah 7 reflects a time when Israel had become deeply corrupt and divided. In the prophet's day, loyalty to God often placed the faithful in conflict even with their own families. By invoking this passage, Jesus identifies his ministry with the prophetic expectation of a decisive moment in Israel's story. The arrival of the Messiah would reveal who truly trusted in God's promises. Families that had once been united under the traditions of Israel would find themselves divided over the identity of Jesus. Some would recognize him as the promised son of David, while others would reject him. The message of the kingdom would therefore create a line of separation within the nation itself. Jesus continues, open quote, "He who loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and he who loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me." Close quote. The call to acknowledge the Messiah demanded a loyalty that surpassed every other earthly relationship. In the covenant world of Israel, family bonds were among the strongest social ties. Yet the arrival of the promised king required that allegiance to him stand above all other loyalties. This language reflects the gravity of the moment in which Jesus and his disciples lived. The fulfillment of centuries of prophecy had arrived. The Messiah stood in the midst of Israel, and the decision regarding his identity would determine the direction of one's entire relationship to the covenant promises. The next statement intensifies this theme. Open quote, "And he who does not take his cross and follow after me is not worthy of me." Close quote. In the first century, the cross was a symbol of shame and Roman execution. Long before the crucifixion of Jesus himself, the image of carrying a cross represented complete surrender to a path that could lead to suffering and rejection. Those who followed Jesus in that generation would often face persecution, exclusion from synagogues, and opposition from their own people. The disciples were therefore being prepared for the cost of bearing witness to the Messiah in a time of national transition. Their proclamation would place them at odds with many who remained committed to the established religious structures of the day. Finally, Jesus declares, open quote, "He who finds his life will lose it, and he who loses his life for my sake will find it." Close quote. This statement reflects the paradox at the heart of the gospel proclamation. Many in Israel sought to preserve their place within the existing order, an order centered around the temple system and the traditions that had developed around it. Yet in clinging to that familiar world, they would ultimately forfeit the life that God was bringing through the Messiah. Those who embraced Jesus, even at the cost of rejection or hardship, would discover the true life promised in the covenant. In losing their lives for his sake, relinquishing status, security, or acceptance within the old framework, they would find the life that God had prepared through the fulfillment of his redemptive plan. Within this passage, the authority of Jesus stands at the center. He speaks not merely as a teacher, but as the one in whom the promises of God reach their completion. The divisions he describes arise because the fulfillment of God's purposes had arrived in him. At the same time, the life he brings is not achieved through human effort or merit. The message proclaimed by the disciples was that the kingdom had drawn near through the work of God himself. The Messiah had come to accomplish what the law and the prophets had long anticipated. Through him, the covenant story would reach its culmination, and the life promised by God would be revealed to those who believed. Thus, Matthew 10:34-39 portrays a moment of profound transition in the history of Israel. The coming of the Messiah exposed hearts, divided loyalties, and marked the turning point between the old age and the new. In the midst of that upheaval stood the call to recognize the one through whom God was bringing his purposes to completion.